The American by Andrew Britton. This is a 367-page book with 36 chapters. It was kind of a Tom Clancy style of book, and I would also register it more as a Tom Clancy Splinter Cell style. There was more violence than a straight-up spy novel, so just be aware of that. I started reading this mostly out of nostalgia. I read this in high school when I was much younger, and I did enjoy the book at the time. The violence didn't really bother me then. Maybe now that I have a family, I'm not sure what it was. Maybe I just didn't care back then. I'm not sure. But when I did start reading it, though, just last month, this became more on point because the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan. And so the Taliban was taking over, and this story was really, hit home on current events. So it was written in 2006, so it was after the original war in Afghanistan started and all that mess. But I don't want to get into politics. It just turned out to be way on point for current events. So I was kind of surprised there. The premise is a white terrorist trained in the U.S. Special Forces assassinates a senator, and he has plans to do 2 more attacks in the U.S. So the main character who is working against that bad guy terrorist is a former Special Forces soldier and also former CIA agent, retired. The main character was served in the same unit, so there is kind of that dynamic going on there. And you get to hear the whole backstory and all that stuff, but if I had to sum up this book in one sentence, I would say it is beauty, violence, and motivation all rolled into one. The author does a really good job of describing the scenery of each setting, and I really liked that. There were places that I had never thought of visiting or don't think I ever would, but the way that the author described it, it made me want to go there and check it out just because of the beauty of the things. So some other things I liked: the motivations of each individual. There really was like the driver. I was able to see or picture a character and then know what drives them or motivates them. And to me, that was much more relatable. I could, picture the story better and follow along. It just made it really easy to follow along. The other thing that I liked was the implication that terrorists could be U.S. trained. There was a whole thing about like the U.S. CIA arming insurgents and all that stuff. So, the U.S. shooting themselves in the foot, that kind of thing. So either way, there were some things I liked about this book. There were some things I didn't like about this book. There was more politics than I expected or remembered. Not a big deal, but that does set the scene. So it's really a needed piece to set the stage between the U.S. and how the U.S. is postured towards Iran. And so that is the whole backdrop, and then that sets up the story. But, I got through the first chapter and then the action started, so not a big deal. The amount of violence, like I said before, I kind of was shocked. I had forgotten that part of the story. And really, the main character's boss is like, hey, do things quietly. And then the main character just rolls in and just causes devastation. So I get that they're on a time clock and that people are going to die, but it just, it was a little more than I remembered. So the last thing that I didn't like was the sheer number of people. I think there were probably like 5 or 6 chapters where it just introduced a person, and you're like, you get their motivation, you get their background, and it's like, am I going to be remembering this person 2 chapters from now, or are they just going to go away? So like not knowing whether the person was going to come back or be a recurring character or just a throwaway character kind of took me out of the story a little bit, but I can see why. Like they wanted it to be, they wanted to show, the author wanted to show how the bad guy got past port security. And so they introduced, port security characters who were just doing their job or trying to get home to their family, that kind of thing. And it wasn't like they were, backroom dealing, nefarious, like they let it slide. It was more of like the charming and, getting it through port security. So it was useful. It was a neat tool. It just, I don't want to say it bothered me, but it was just a bummer. So but by no means was any of them a deal breaker. I enjoyed this book. Um, it did slow down a little bit in the middle, and that was part of the story. Like, you had to feel frustrated and like things weren't going, the way of the main character, and that was part of the plot line. So I did fall into that as well, and I picked up and I was rooting for the main character, and so when they did get a break, it was that joy and elation kind of followed along. Yep, this book went by pretty quick. I wouldn't say it was as fast as like a regular adventure novel. Maybe the politics and the violence kind of slowed it down for me, but targeted at a US, UK audience, or maybe anyone English speaking. And I did like there was multiple facets to the story. The characters all had really good motivations, and really it was a nice story. There was some violence along the way, but it did turn out good. So this is almost kind of more of a thriller, I would think, like how a mystery thriller, I think, would almost be a good category for this. But yes, I read this once a long time ago and read it again. It's worth your time. This is The American, and buy your books used if you can.